Okay, all. Today we're gonna draw Spider-Man. Like any other character, any other drawing you're ever gonna do. It's just made out of basic shapes such as circles, rectangles, triangles, squares, and just how you put them together that makes what you got. Mostly we'll be talking about the art of Spider-Man, how to draw Spider-Man, random Spider-Man facts, whatever pops in my head. We might go over some of the actual drawing, might do less of that, more of that. This is my first time, so we'll go from there. Spider-Man was created in 1962 by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. I believe Jack Kirby did the cover for the first issue, which was Amazing Fantasy 15, his first appearance. Stan wanted to do more relatable heroes, people we could relate to instead of the outrageously fantastic superheroes that DC were doing at the time, like Batman, Superman. They didn't have any real human problems, and that's what Stan Lee wanted to bring to the table. The publisher at the time, I believe it was his cousin or something like that, didn't think it was a good idea, but he told Stan that Amazing Fantasy was coming to an end, so with the last issue, he could pretty much do whatever he wants. So Stan and Steve Ditko did Spider-Man. Obviously, it was a runaway hit, and in 1963, he got his own series, The Amazing Spider-Man. The first villain was the forgettable foe known as the Chameleon. He's appeared a bunch of times since, but he's no Green Goblin or Dr. Octopus. Okay, back to the drawing. Right now we're putting some definition in the arms and starting to get some detail in there so we can get ready for inks. I don't get very detailed in the pencils on this one, and I do most of the filling in inks because it's really just a bunch of blocks with the black and blue of his costume. Not much line work needed, and the red and the webs really are the most interesting part of it. We just kind of make those up as we go along with the webs. The way I draw Spider-Man is heavily influenced by the artists that I was reading at the time, such of course as Todd McFarlane, Eric Larson, but I was also getting into indie books such as Scud the Disposable Assassin, Rob Schrab, and Johnny the Homicidal Maniac with Johan Vasquez, and so a lot of that is brought into what I draw with the simpler shapes and spot blacks, and of course Mike Mignola with Hellboy. So when everybody I knew was getting into drawing more lines and making things more complex, I was trying to pull things out and make things more simple shapes and just blacks and colors and splashes. As far as the way I color things go, I haven't really changed things much since back in the 90s when the big thing was digital colors and blending and blurring, and it was just garish and ugly. What I did was a little different. It's kind of more the anime style of coloring where you got 2 or 3 shades and hard lines. Weirdly, I didn't get that from anime. I got it from an artist known as Martin French. One of our field trips in art school was to go down to the site of illustrators in New York City, and part of the display was his work, and it was very simple black drawings, and the colors were all 1 or 2 shades and hard lines, and it made a really big impact on me. So the next assignment we had for coloring in the computer class, I colored it kind of the way he colored things, and I got an A on that assignment. He was like, what happened? It's like night and day. And so I kind of stuck with it ever since. It's a simple but effective way to color things, and if you're into anime and things like that, you'll recognize it. And I probably should have been talking about this in the color section because we're still penciling, but anyway. So we're drawing a little spider on Spidey's chest. That's kind of one of his defining features. Batman has his bat, Superman has his S, Spider-Man has a spider. It's not as pronounced or noticeable or as in your face as either of those two, but it's there and it's important. And if you don't get it right, it just looks weird. We're also drawing in the lines of his costume where the red and the blue separate and where the webs go, and playing with the hands, which right now are still just blocks of shape with no fingers, but we'll get to that eventually. I have next week's drawing in the can ready to go, and the next 2 are in my head and ready to be drawn. If there's anything anybody watching wants to see, please be sure to leave it in the comment. If it's something interesting or something I haven't drawn in a while or something I want to draw or something I didn't think of drawing, then I'll probably do it. So just leave it in the comments and I'm going to read them all and pick something from there. Still working on the webs and blinking in his costume. The reason why I started with Spider-Man is the simplicity of Spider-Man. You don't have to worry about noses and mouths and eyes and expressions. Well, you need some expression in the eyes just to give an idea where he's going, but he's just swinging through the city on this one, so nothing too fancy. In fact, we don't even draw a city. You'll see at the end. It's more of a poster image. So we're finally putting some fingers on him and doing the usual Spidey swinging whip hands and putting definition into the feet, which are a serious McFarlane style feet, but not as wonky and goblin-esque and slipper-like. I'm also just finishing up a few small details before I start the inks in a few seconds, which is a little premature on this one. I left it kind of rough when I went to the inks. Right now I'm going to make the new layer for the inks and lighten the bottom layer so you can see the inks, and just a few things like the size of his head and whatnot. One mistake I made when doing this drawing is I reset my Clip Studio to factory defaults because I had windows and things all over the place. So just years of changing windows, moving windows, making a mess. I also shot this vertically instead of horizontally, which I fix in the future. But the one thing I didn't do is I didn't get the stabilization to where I wanted to on the brushes. So here I am fumbling through the brushes trying to find the size I want and go through it. And you'll notice I don't have the cleanest lines ever on this, and I don't really like the clean lines. I like them to be a little sketchy. I think they're a little more interesting. But I do clean up a lot of stuff and get to it. But this is the fun part where it actually starts to look like a drawing. So we get the head in, shape of the eyes, all the other fun stuff. So back when I was growing up, all the rage was Spider-Man #1 and Todd McFarlane, and he gets to write the book. And McFarlane, he had the big eyes on Spider-Man. He started the big eye trend, the bug eyes, and I was really into that. And I also drew some inspiration from Art Adams and Mike Golden on my Spider-Man, which you'll see later. We'll talk about that when we get to the webs. But he put the little points in the middle and actually made Spider-Man a little scary. And Eric Larson followed. He simplified the formula, but he kept the bug eyes, but he made Spider-Man insanely flexible, and the drawings were free and fun, and it was a huge influence on everything I did. So right now we're getting the arms in. Remember, line weight's important. You know, the things in the foreground should be thicker than the things in the background. And I also decided to wing this hand a little bit while I was inking, just drawing some fingers and shapes and palms. And one thing you'll start to pick up once you start drawing a lot is certain things and shapes that you just get used to drawing, and hands in this position are one of them. So I just go with it. And other videos I plan on doing are just how to draw hands, how to draw feet, how to draw eyes, how to draw a head. You know, little things that I think will be useful to people. As you notice, my inks are rough. The lines aren't very smooth. But when you get it all together, you get a fun, free, coherent drawing. That's kind of one of the things I took from a lot of the indie people that inspired me. I don't think things need to be perfect. Perfect is boring. I was also told by one of my teachers, you know, those lines don't have to connect. Those lines don't have to be perfect. It's more interesting that way. Also, you'll see that the lines on the arm in the background are thinner than the ones in the foreground. It kind of gives the idea of depth and that it's further away. So right now we're back on the other forearm, trying to figure out where the costume's gonna go. So I know where I'm going to draw those fun little webs later. That's the most fun part of Spidey, drawing in all the webs. Being a bit sarcastic there. I almost did the black suit just so I wouldn't have to do all the webs, but I figured if we're going to do Spidey, let's do the Spidey most people know and love, and that is the original. The one thing I did forget is the webs underneath his arms. He has like web wing things on his armpits, and totally did not add those in this drawing. So back to the inks. We're in the arms now. Now we're putting some muscle definition in his chest and his biceps, and I don't remember the names of all the muscles, so you'll just hear me call things chest muscles and arm muscles a lot. And I just put little lines in as indicators of where those muscles are. My anatomy is not perfect, and it never will be. And a lot of the people I grew up reading, their anatomy wasn't perfect. If you look at a McFarlane drawing, he pretty much is winging it. He got weird things going on with legs and arms and poses, but when you look at it, like, damn, that's cool. So that's kind of the philosophy I went with. People like Jim Lee and Mark Silvestri, who are fantastic artists who I look up to a lot and influence me a lot. They're a little more clean on the anatomy, but that's not really the style I ever followed. I was more of a Frank Miller, Rob Schrab, Todd McFarlane, Art Adams kind of guy. You don't see as much Art Adams because Art Adams is really detail orientated, but the shapes and the cartooniness of it is something that he did that followed me along and I kept with the whole time. He also played with proportions a lot more. His figures were lankier and thinner, and his waists were longer and thinner, and a lot of that I did. And we talk about art a little more when we get to the webs too, because he was a big influence on the way Spider-Man's webs are drawn. So when we get there, we'll talk about that a bit more. Right now we're working on the foot. This foot's more in the foreground, so we give it a little more detail, separate the balls. Lines are thicker at the top, thinner in the back. Just same thing, show distance and depth. This leg in the back you don't need a lot of detail with because it's going to be mostly black with some blue highlights. But you got to differentiate where the knees are, certain muscle groups are. The bottom will have some detail because we got to draw the spidey webs because it's the boot and the foot. And that muscle there, I don't know what it's called, but I always put it in and it needs to be there. Now this foot gave me some issues because I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted it, because the original foot was clicking straight on and it just didn't fit, so I kind of ended up going with more of a side shot of the foot. And the problem with Spider-Man swinging through the city is I can't go all Rob Liefeld on it and put a rock in front of his foot, or I could have put smoke in front of his foot, but that would have been kind of weird with Spidey flipping through the city. Okay, here we're getting into the interesting part, because like I said, I use a lot of blacks and blues, and I treat the blues of his costume more like a black, so I'm blocking in where all the blacks are going to go and where all the blues are going to go. You'll see how it all comes together in a minute. And there we go. Foreground, black, the white on the sides will end up being a blue. I think I used 2 shades of blue. And we do that with the other leg, throw in some details with the eraser pen. That's the one good thing about drawing digitally. If you want to throw some white in something, you just change the color to white or erase. You dash the line, and it's just like doing black hatching, except you're using white. This is more of the same here. We're blocking it out so we can put the blacks in. We do the same thing with his arms and his rib cage. You'll see I start filling that in a moment. You could be really free and clean with this because most of the little lines sticking off the lines will be filled in once you put in the black. And there we go. Just like that. Spidey's legs are blocked in and almost ready to go. Now we're gonna move up to his arms and rib cage area. And we're gonna do pretty much the same thing. Right there we got differentiate the costume. And we got the leg coming from the left side. So we just gotta draw on everything we want to keep white, which will be blue eventually, and fill in the rest for the blacks. That's something, again, that McFarlane and Eric Larson brought Spider-Man more of a black than a blue there. Or it's insinuated it's a dark blue because the blues are the shadows. The way that I do it is more in line with the way Frank Miller was doing Sin City at the time, and Mike Mignola started with Hellboy. Well, we're gonna do the same thing with the arms. We're just gonna put in big blocks of black and some white triangles and lines to show where the muscles are, and a couple lines in black to show where the muscles are also, and the spots that are going to be left white. Sometimes I'll throw some hatching in there, sometimes I don't. You'll see in the drawing next week I use some more hatching and more line work. So I keep things consistent mostly in the way I spot my blacks and the line works and the coloring, but sometimes I throw in a little more hatching, sometimes I don't. It depends what I think the drawing needs. So it's consistently inconsistent, I guess would be a good way to put it. But again, we're doing the same thing on the arm. We're blocking out the spots where you want to see muscle definition. And then we just fill the rest in black. And there we go. Black, black, black. Spotting blacks is one of my favorite things to do. Now we're going to clean up his hand a little bit because I kind of made a mess of it. So that's the thumb in the background. We'll just make that black and probably define it a little more. A couple more lines, show where his fingers go and knuckles and all those fun little details. This is the part where I just start jumping around and fixing little things I don't like here and there, cleaning up the points on his eyes and filling in spots that I missed. And little things before we get to the colors, which is coming up soon. But right now, this is the funnest part of drawing Spider-Man. I say that facetiously, where you draw those little webs all over his costume, his defining feature. So for the head, you start from the center point, and there's this little circular thing between the eyes that everything leads off to. And you draw the lines kind of like you're drawing a pumpkin, kind of, so you're getting the perspective around the head. And then you just start drawing lines, which in circular patterns all the way around until you're done. It's a little time consuming, and if you do it the McFarlane and Larson way, there's a lot more lines. The artists before that, everything was spaced out more. But of course, I grew up in the age where you put in as many lines as possible, even though part of my whole style was getting rid of as many lines as possible. But again, you also see me jumping around and fixing other little things like adding in more muscles and changing the shape of a finger. There we go. Now more spider lines, lines, an endless cycle of lines. You'll see me erasing and redoing a bunch, and see me not really worrying about how straight they are sometimes, and how clean they are, because once you get it all in, you can't see any of that anyway. Also, if you notice on my brush, I don't have the stabilization turned on. That's part of my resetting it for this drawing, so the lines are a little rougher than they should have been, because stabilization cleans up cleans up your lines a lot when you're doing digital drawings. I catch it later on, but by then it's kind of too late. But it worked. I got through it. It got done. We got the Spidey lines. You also want to make sure the Spidey lines are cupping upwards. You don't want them cupping downwards. If you draw them going downwards, which I should have done just to kind of show you what I'm talking about, it looks wrong in Spider-Man. It's like, what the hell did you do to Spider-Man? That's not Spidey. It almost looks like it's just wrong. There's no other way to describe it. I remember watching a McFarlane interview where he talks about it, and he was absolutely right. You draw those lines cupping downwards, sorry. It's no good. Another thing you'll notice is I'm pretty much only using stock brushes here for my inks and my pencils. There's a million different ink pens out there and a million different ink packs you could get. You get smooth ones, rough ones that do hatching for you. But you don't really need any of that. As long as you know what you're doing and you know how you want your lines to work, just the simple brushes that come with your program should work just fine. Later on, I do use a couple custom brushes because I wanted to do Ben-Day dots and for shading, and you'll see that in a bit, and we'll talk about it when we get there. But right now, just webs on top of webs on top of webs. It's tedious, it's boring, but if you want to draw a convincing Spider-Man, you gotta draw a lot of webs, especially when you get to the webs you're swinging on. And you also notice while I'm doing the webs that I picked a brush that doesn't have any real pressure sensitivity for thick to thin, because you want to keep that line consistent. So you just want a straight, boring line, kind of like using a rapidograph instead of a quill pen or a brush. I mean, some people can get these kind of lines with a quill pen or a brush, but since we're in a computer and we have our options, we could pick the brushes we use, and I decided to use a brush that doesn't have any of those sensitivities. And if you're going to draw Spider-Man, it's just easier if you do the same thing. So, since I'll be drawing these webs for a while, let's talk about something that's not webs. The reason I'm doing these videos is because when I was a kid, they didn't have much like this. You could buy the How to Draw the Marvel way, and you could buy anatomy books, and you could draw things from comic books. In fact, the way I started is I used to trace things. The first thing I remember drawing comic book wise was the cover to Marvel Comics Presents #1. It's a Wolverine, but I didn't really draw it. I traced it, and I traced a lot of stuff after that. And one thing that tracing does is it shows you where the shapes are and where they go and how to do it. And if you're having trouble with something, trace it, look back at it, see what you did. Go over a drawing and put the shapes over, put the circles over the heads, the triangles over the hands and things like that. You'll be surprised how much it helps you. Tracing is a valuable learning tool. Also, I used to sit in a room with my friend Brian, and I had this giant drafting table my father got me from a friend of his at work, and we would sit in that room for hours just penciling and drawing, and we had these giant markers to fill in the blacks, and those things were toxic, and we didn't open windows, and you'd get a little high off of just breathing in marker fumes. Probably killed a few brain cells too. I would not recommend it. But these days now we have iPads and we have Photoshop and Clip Studio and Procreate, which not my favorite drawing program. That's why I'm using Clip. But because when I first started doing this with digital, Clip Studio, for some reason the brushes worked the exact opposite of what I wanted, and I couldn't get them to do what I wanted to do. And I was literally going to sell my iPad because drawing on it was a nightmare. And like the day before I was going to list it, a friend of mine sent me a message. He's like, "Hey, did you know they put Clip Studio on the iPad?" I'm like, "No, they did not," because that's what I was using on my Cintiq tablet. Sure enough, I went to the App Store and there it was. Not a big fan of the monthly subscription option. I like the way Procreate, you give them like $30 and you have it forever. I don't know if they've changed that model since. I don't even know if my Procreate will open. I'll have to check that out one of these days. And but sure enough, there it was, and it was the exact same thing as the desktop. And since I do everything the old slow way, I just love having all the menus on top and being able to treat it like I did on the desktop and didn't really have to learn anything new. So that was quite helpful. And another reason why I'm drawing these videos is motivation to draw more. I go through phases where I draw a lot, and I go through phases where I don't draw at all. And I want to go through a phase where I draw a lot more. So I figure if I make videos and I share them with people, and people watch along and make requests, and we draw together, we'll get a lot more done. Something I've been doing all my life, and I plan to keep doing, and maybe we can do it together. If I get enough subs, I think you need 50 or 100, and then I could live stream, and then we could sit around and chat and draw together. I think that'll be fun. It'll definitely keep me motivated to draw more, and hopefully it'll help a couple of you too. Or if you just want to sit around and watch and laugh at the idiot drawing Spider-Man, I'm okay with that too. Some people get it, some people don't. But if you've made it this far into the video, I'm guessing you're one of the people who do. Also, another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to break these into 2 to 3 videos a week. One long one like you see now. And then I'm going to break it into the pencil and the ink section. Sometimes the pencil, sometimes the ink, depending on the drawing and how long it takes. And then the color section. And we'll have some shorts thrown in too. I've never made a short, so that'll be a fun thing to figure out. But right now, we're trying to figure out the shape of the webs he's swinging on. Now, the webs he's swinging on. Before Todd McFarlane, it was pretty boring. They were straight lines spread out, almost similar to the webs you see in his costume, or just a white line, nothing too fancy. But Todd brought to the mainstream the spaghetti webbing, as he calls it, where you got the main line and then you got webs wrapping around it and knots, and they go in all these different directions and they spread. And the first time I saw it was in an issue of Long Shot, drawn by Art Adams, and it was inked by Wells Portacio. It's issue 3 or 4. It's got the white cover. She-Hulk's punching him on the cover, but Spider-Man also makes an appearance. And if you look at the webbing, it's a version of the spaghetti webbing where it's the line with the knots and the little webs circling around. It's not as extreme as Todd made it. Todd brought it to like a whole new level of insanity, and I guess the editors didn't like it. And I'm toned it down, and the more they asked him to tone it down, the more he made it worse. And if you notice, they have to go in front and wrap around. You can't just have it all in front or all behind, or it just looks kind of weird. But Art Adams didn't even start that trend. This trend actually started with Michael Golden, who was a huge influence on Art Adams. And that's where he got it from. And then when he did it, he brought it to more of a mainstream Marvel crowd, because he became very popular. And older interviews with Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane, they'll quote Art Adams as an influence. You don't see it much anymore, but I don't think they deny it if you ask them. And so that's where the spaghetti webbing came from. Mike Golden to Art Adams, and then Todd McFarlane just went nuts with it. Eric Larson cleaned it up a little more, but it was still there. And some guys use it now, some guys don't. But I'm old school, so I use it. I like the messy approach and the knots and the overlaps, and so that's what we're doing here. And you got the classic webs and the whips and the so it's a little tedious to draw all this because you got to get it all in, but once you get a pattern down and you get going, it's not as hard as it looks. You just draw lines and the shapes you want them, and you wrap them around, and you erase certain spots and bring certain parts to the foreground. And when you get to the end, you draw more knots in, you add a few more lines, and before you know it, you got a whole bunch of spaghetti webbing. So this is the last step before I get to coloring. And I hope you enjoyed that little tangent on the history of spaghetti webbing from Mike Golden to Art Adams to Todd McFarlane. So the other fun part about the spaghetti webbing is it could be a little messy and a little uncontrollable, because that kind of adds to the coolness of it. The more lines, the more overlaps, the better. I was on Reddit the other day and I looked through different art forums and comic art forums, and one of them, a guy drew a beautiful Spiderman. I mean, his line work was great. It was far more detailed than anything I'll ever draw, and he did the spaghetti webbing, and something just was off on the whole drawing. I mean, it was beautiful. The colors were great, the cool background, the webs. I loved everything about it, but something just was not right. And I looked at it and I zoom in, and it was the webbing. He didn't do the over-under thing. Everything in pretty much just went in front. He didn't bother to have anything going back, and it just, it's one of those things that took me out of the whole drawing, and it's an important part of the drawing. So when you're doing the spaghetti webbings, the important part is the overlap, the front to back, the swirling around, and if you get that right, it'll look really cool. If you don't, it's going to look really weird, and it's going to take people out of it. Not everybody will notice, but the people who do it will drive them freaking nuts. Speaking of driving people nuts, I'm sure a couple of you noticed that the screen's sideways now because I turned the iPad around. When I did this, I forgot to put the orientation lock on the iPad to keep it straight. So in future videos, I remembered to do that. Actually, the next video I forget to do that too, but I do the whole thing horizontal, which fills up more of the screen. But from now on, I do have the screen locked, and everything will be more stable for the future. And right now we're still drawing the spaghetti webs. It's time consuming, very time consuming, but if you want a nice, clean, convincing Spider-Man, I think this is the best way to do it. So don't skimp, kids. Also, I'm not used to talking this much, so I apologize if I ramble and go on unnecessary tangents, but there's only so much you could say about things like spaghetti webbing, and it actually gets to your throat for a while. I was not expecting that part of this deal, but we'll work through it and we'll figure it all out, and eventually we'll have a pattern down that works, and eventually we'll be live streaming and we'll actually be having conversations. That'll make life a hell of a lot easier for everybody involved. So once we finish with the spider webs and the spaghetti webbing, we're gonna move on to the dots. One of my favorite parts of any drawing is the dots. And I'm talking about the dots before I even get to the dots. Why would I do that? I have no idea. But we're leaving this in because I think the mistakes and the warts and the imperfections are what make things interesting. So we got this part of the webbing done. We're gonna go in, we're gonna add some shading to certain parts just to differentiate so it's not just a big white ball. And now we're into the dots. When I was younger, we used to have to do this with plastic. We'd decide where we wanted to go. We'd have these plastic sheets, they're like sticker sheets, and the dots were pre-printed on it. You'd get different thicknesses and different weights, and some were gradients, and we just had all these different options. I had piles of these sheets. I went to an art store that was going out of business down in New Haven. They weren't going out of business, they were moving to another shop, and they just had piles of the stuff they were selling for $1 a sheet, and I bought every one I could find. And they were in these really cool old black and yellow Art Deco boxes, and they were dusty, and you could tell they've been there probably for 10 years, maybe even longer. And so I bought them all, and I just had this big collection of these dots. If you look at some original comic art from the 80s and 90s where they use these things, there's big yellow blotches all over it because the glue that stuck these things to your paper would yellow over time, and it just looks awful. But it looked really cool when we did it, and when you made a photocopy and then you started coloring it, it just added to it. Yeah, it was like a natural shitting. They also had this paper. It was just regular white paper, you draw on it. You see it in the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics, and then you would have these two liquids. And when you put the liquids on, it would just add like lines and hatching going one way, and then you had another liquid, and that would activate the lines going the other way. They still make a lot of this stuff. It's mostly used for anime drawings now, and it's marketed towards anime, but back in the day it was used for everything. And now we're done with the inks. We're gonna move on to the colors in the next video. Thanks for watching.